the meeting to order.
Mics are on.
Mics are on. Everything you say is being broadcast at home now. Okay, the meeting's called to order.
She's trying to do her job, too.
Chair, we have received one other business item in advance of the meeting. It pertains to the water shortage response bylaw and was raised by Councillor O'Neill.
Don't have time to do it.
Anything else? Okay, seeing none. Motion to, I guess we need a motion to approve the... Second?
To approve the what?
Don't we need a motion? Sorry, no, we don't. Actually, we don't in here. No?
That's all right.
Just whatever.
Well, I was trying to think approve what? What are we... No, okay.
However, I approve of whatever.
Approve whatever it was. Called the meeting to order. We have a list. New item. Okay. Adoption of the minutes.
The first item on the agenda is the minutes of the Council and Committee meeting held on Monday, April 25th, 2016. The recommendation is that the committee approves the minutes.
So moved.
Moved by Councillor Towner.
Second.
Second, Councillor Asmunson. All in favor? Any opposed? Sorry, it's moving. Okay, that's carried. Unanimous.
Item 2 is a presentation from the United Way of Lower Mainland. I would like to invite Ms. Mary Ellen Shaftsma to please come forward. Ms. Shaftsma will be speaking to the Community Profile Series on the Tri-Cities.
Great.
Welcome.
Thank you very much for having me here. Having us here, I brought a couple colleagues with me, Tracy Green, who some of you might know, is a Coquitlam resident, and Carlos Carvalho, also from the United Way. So I'm here to tell you, just give you some highlights. I know I only have 5 minutes of a community profile. It's the third in a series that we are doing across all the communities in the Lower Mainland. This one is, you got it in your packets, it focuses on Tri-Cities, and I'll give you a few Coquitlam specific highlights today. So just a quick refresher who the United Way is. The United Way's vision is a healthy, caring, inclusive community, and our mission is to strengthen the community's capacity to address social issues. And we do this through 4 main mechanisms: research, collaboration, investing in communities, and advocacy. Just to give you a brief overview, and you've got a handout there as well of what United Way is doing here in Coquitlam. In 2015, we invested almost $1.5 million, funding 45 agencies and 60 programs that deliver services to Coquitlam residents. So they might not be based here, but they reach out to Coquitlam residents. And I'm hoping you've all heard of our spotlight investment in Coquitlam River called Avenues of Change. It's a really innovative, place-based approach to involving the whole community in solutions around childhood vulnerability and reducing childhood vulnerability. So as I said, this is the third in a series that we're doing across the Lower Mainland, where we dive deep into a community's profile, looking at socio-demographic indicators. We really want to be a knowledge resource in our partnership with our agencies and our municipalities and our other funding partners. And so we decided to launch this series to provide information that's going to help with planning. So we looked at 3 different types of indicators: population, economic, and social, because these are the 3 sort of key areas that you need to look at when you're doing social planning. You need to know who your population is and what their characteristics are like, where they live, and what their strengths and assets are. As an added feature as well, BC 211 is a United Way funded agency, and we were able to obtain data on calls by Coquitlam residents to the BC 211 line, which can give you an idea of sort of some of the issues that Coquitlam residents might be facing. Without further ado, population indicators, there are 10 in the full report. Hopefully you have had or will have a chance to have a look at it. I'm just going to show you 2 here that popped out at me. The age distribution in Coquitlam is obviously quite high in the sort of working, parenting, family range, the 35 to 64, and the next biggest is children. So clearly families are of great importance here in Coquitlam. Immigrant population. Coquitlam has the highest percentage of your total population of foreign-born citizens. And as you can see in all of the communities in the Tri-Cities, the immigrant population has been growing. Interestingly, Coquitlam is the second most chosen destination for government-assisted refugees. You may already know that. Between, let's see, 2010 and 2013, 600 refugees have settled here in Coquitlam. Next, economic indicators. I will highlight 2. There are 12 in the report. The median family income in Coquitlam is just over $82,000. It's slightly higher than Metro Vancouver's, which is an average of $80,000 median income, and it's a little bit lower within the Tri-Cities area. But in terms of graduation rates, notably, Coquitlam School District has the fewest kids not graduating, and it's kind of a weird twist, but the fewest kids not graduating from high school, so 18.1%. So you have good success there with your schools. And social indicators, again, there are 12 in the full report. I'll highlight 2. The composition of family and the family environment are really significant, have a significant impact on children, and also indicates knowing what your family mix is. It has a strong indication for types of support programs you might need. So Coquitlam's percentage of lone parent families is the same as Metro Vancouver's at 15.5%, and kind of sits in between the other 2 cities of Tri-Cities. And it looks like Coquitlam is a very safe place to live. Your crime rates are the lowest of the comparison municipalities across the Lower Mainland. So that's it. I just wanted to give you a taste for what was in the full report. I have been in touch with your planning staff as well. They know about it. They've been given a copy, and I do hope that it becomes a valuable resource as you do your planning for the city.
Great.
Any
Thank
questions?
you. I have one question. Councillor O'Neill.
Yes, thanks very much. I've had a long connection through my wife with the Coquitlam School District, and I know the district always prided itself on its high graduation rate, and you pointed that out here now. That rate was probably, they actually keep track of 3 graduation rates. The first time grade 12, which I guess is just after 4 year, and just last year it was 87%, but eligible grade 12 is 96, and the 6-year graduation rate, 95.7.
Great.
And at last week's school board meeting, they announced quite proudly that they now have the 2nd highest graduation rate in the province. So it all confirms this. However, your executive summary of the report contradicts all of that. The executive summary says the high school completion rate is very good in the Coquitlam School District, encompassing the Tri-Cities, ranking 49th best out of the 57 districts in the province. It's actually 2nd best right now, and it's never been much worse than 5th or something. It's always been very, very high in Coquitlam. So I don't know where that...
Yeah, I'll have to
49
check the
came from.
source.
It was a real clangor for me.
I
And
will
otherwise,
definitely-
fantastic, interesting, fascinating
Yeah.
report that shows that there's some really interesting information about poverty levels, income levels, family formation, all that sort of stuff. It's great, great stuff. And thanks for doing all the work and making the presentation.
And I'll check that source and see where that came from and compare it to what you've told me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I have Councillor Wilson and then Councillor Cirillo.
Thought that 49th worst was because of the double negative for you.
Well, even if it's 49, 57, it'd be 8th best, if that's what they were trying to say, 8th best.
Right.
But I don't even think it's 8th best. It's always been very higher,
Okay.
quite a bit higher than
I
that.
definitely will check it. Sorry.
Councillor Wilson.
I found page 62 very interesting when we talk about housing and services physically located in Coquitlam, services physically located in Coquitlam.
Yeah.
Can you explain sort of what that means?
So these are the calls that BC 211 has received from Coquitlam residents, and they classify them by their referrals out to the services that the person is calling about, to services that are located within the city and services outside of the city, or online referrals. So of the housing calls, 11% were met by a referral to a service within the city of Coquitlam, and the 89% were referred outside of the city of Coquitlam.
So that's Port Coquitlam, sorry.
Oh, sorry, yes.
But
Yeah, wrong.
so does that mean when you talk about services physically located, that's not necessarily placing them in housing located in that city?
No, it's a referral to a service that will help them find housing or is housing.
Right.
Yeah.
So is that odd that we would only be able to help 2% of the people? like where it talks about housing, Coquitlam has 2% where the services are physically located in Coquitlam. That means we don't have those kind of agencies in Coquitlam? Is that what that means?
Or just those particular calls weren't, only 2% were able to be addressed within the city of Coquitlam. We don't have, the details around the exact reason for the call. They just categorize this around housing. So that could be somebody who needs housing, who is looking for not just a homeless shelter, but they're losing their lease and need to find new housing, that sort of thing. It's a big bucket.
What I was trying to understand is that because we have so few affordable below market units, or it's
No,
not
I don't think you can infer that from this, actually.
And then the food bank, 0%. Is that because the main food bank is located in Port Moody and not in Coquitlam?
That could be, yeah.
The referral agency share is located in Coquitlam, but
Okay,
But they would probably refer to the food bank.
right. Yeah.
However, we do have a food bank and a church in Coquitlam, so
Okay.
that's associated with it. So I was just trying to understand how those metrics worked. So
Good.
thank you.
Good. Councillor Zarrell's questions, I think, were answered. So I have Councillor Reid and then Mayor Stewart.
This is all of 2011, and so when is your next this year?
New census coming out this year. So as soon as the new census data is available, we'll update these.
So through the year, like you have crime profiles and all of that, you don't update them as you go. You wait for census to update everything.
Depends on the data source. Most of this is based on the census or the National Household Survey, which isn't quite as reliable of data because it was voluntary, and so the response rates adds in a lot of bias. So we can't boil it down to very small areas using the National Household Survey. But the mandatory census gives us really solid data that we can compare back to. Must be 2006. Will have been the last full.
Because these stats, as far as housing and families and all that, are so far
It's quite
away,
old,
it
yeah,
doesn't
but
really even matter.
it's the most recent available data actually right now. So we're
Available
thrilled.
data for housing and that, and housing moves and housing stats into the community, but and I guess there's more up-to-date available data from the police,
Yeah.
fire and all that stuff,
Yeah.
but you just wait till the whole package.
Yeah, because we're doing these across the Lower Mainland, so we're just using the same data sources for all of them. So.
And I suggest, especially in our case, that it's made very clear if it goes out to the public or when it goes out that it's a 2011.
Yeah.
I see you notice it a lot, so let's just make sure everyone else realizes it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Stewart.
So I'm at vacancy rates on page 39, apartment vacancy rates by size, and I'm struggling with. My understanding is that the vacancy rates were the opposite of that they were higher at the smaller units and almost zero at the 3 bedrooms side. And I don't. How do we get those numbers? Not that 2.1 is high, but
Yeah.
certainly is a tight market. But
Yeah, these come from the CMHC, the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation.
okay, so they're just straight their numbers. They're not.
Yeah,
any work
exactly. Yeah, we didn't do any original research here. We just compiled data that we had that's publicly available that we had access to.
That's 2014, so that's more up to date.
Is it skewed because it's Tri-Cities?
No, see.
Thank you.
Okay, seeing no more questions, thank you very much for your
Thank you
presentation
so
today.
much.
Great report, and thank you for coming in and sharing with us.
All right, thank you.
And we've got
Item 3 is a presentation from the Tri-Cities Homelessness and Housing Task Group. I would like to invite Mr. Sandy Burpee to please come forward. Mr. Burpee will be speaking to the housing needs of women and their children in Coquitlam.
Welcome. Good to see you again.
unaffordable.
Nice to be here. Good afternoon, Council. Thank you. At this evening's council meeting, the Tlithicum Society is making a presentation to council. Tlithicum provides currently a recovery house for women with addictions. Many of them have their children. And there is a motion on the agenda tonight for a disbursement of up to $600,000 from the Affordable Housing Reserve Fund to share equity in a second house that Lithicum wants to purchase to double their capacity in the Tri-Cities. And I'm here this afternoon to really just talk about the need for that housing and also to acknowledge this very exciting, this project, because it's the first tapping in the Affordable Housing Reserve Fund for a project which I think you'll find quite compelling. Back in 2013, the task group did a commission to study needs for women and the children in the Tri-Cities, and I just have a bit of data here. I won't dwell on it. Is that? This one. Okay, thank you. Okay. Two supportive housing facilities right now for women with children in the Tri-Cities and close by New West, Tri-City Transition House. It's really the numbers that can't be accommodated here that I found very startling. Tri-City Transition Housing double the number that they do accommodate or turn away each year. And there's a variety of reasons for that. In some cases, it could be the transition house was full or they couldn't accommodate the family's needs, but it's also because some of the women were presenting with primarily a mental health or addictions issue, and they just didn't have the capacity to address that. Elizabeth Kearney House is a shelter for women and children in New Westminster. It's the blue building close to Royal Columbia Hospital. And back in 2012, over 1,500 women and children were turned away that year. They have a very low turnover because for women who do go there, there's very little accommodation that they can afford to be able to actually move out of that facility. So as far as the task group is concerned, there is a huge unmet demand for housing for women and children. Okay. In the study, we identified 6 priority projects. Number 4, housing for women with mental health and addictions issues have children. And the order of priority is really not the order of priority. There certainly is a critical need for the housing for women with mental health and addictions issues with children, along with all the other uses that you can see. Next slide, please. So trying to get a handle on what the need is for housing for addicted women and their children. Hope for Freedom Outreach over the years have identified that somewhere between 15 and 25% of women in the visible homeless population are women. I'd say in the visible population is probably closer to 15%. Once 3030 Gordon opened up, 1/3 of that facility has beds devoted to women, and they filled up pretty quickly because women then had alternatives they didn't have before. The outreach workers tell us that most of the women who in the visible homeless population are mothers. All of them have lost their children, have been apprehended, and so they're on the street. They also say that homeless women with children are particularly difficult to find and count because if a woman who is homeless and has children with her, she does not want to be seen. So our alternative is sleeping in her car, staying with a friend, parents, whatever. But to be visible in that situation makes them vulnerable to losing their children. Most transition houses don't have the capacity to accept women with addictions, and that certainly is the case for the Tri-City Transition Society in the Tri-Cities. And most recovery housing for women can't accommodate children, and that's the case with Hope for Freedom. The experience at Hope for Freedom is that most of the women who come to them are mothers. They don't have their children. They have hung on until they've lost their children. At that point, they have nothing left to lose, and moving into recovery becomes more attractive to them. And when I asked the intake worker last Friday at Hope for Freedom just what she thought the need was for recovery housing for women who have children, she said there's a huge need for recovery housing that will accept mothers with their children, and an expansion of Talitha-Cum capacity would be great. And so as mentioned before, Talitha-Cum are currently the only recovery program in Tri-Cities to accommodate children. There are not many in Metro Vancouver. And one of the other things that Talitha-Cum can do, if a mother doesn't have her children with her, they can help the mother at some point during the recovery to regain their children. And finally, there are 6 criteria in the Affordable Housing Reserve Fund in which proposals for disbursements are evaluated. And 2 of them rose to the surface for me in particular. I know that Talitha Coombe in their letter of intent addressed all 6, and perhaps I'll talk about them tonight. But the first one was breaking the cycle, and the criterion is a project should be able to demonstrate some ability to provide an opportunity for greater self-sufficiency for the population it serves. And certainly I think that's self-evident with regards to the Coombe program. And one of the things that is really good about the Coombe program is that they provide women who are recovering from addiction a powerful incentive to stay in recovery just because they have their children with keep their family together. And I think the other thing is we all realize the benefit of children being raised in a supportive and loving household and not having to go into ministry care. So there's benefits for our community that way as well. And then the second one is degree of leverage. BC Housing is a supporter of Talitha Coombe. They have, in the process of purchasing a house for Talitha Coombe, they've been renting in 2 homes to date. BC Housing is putting up the capital to purchase 1 home. That BC Housing then will retain the equity in it. And then, the second home then would be a partnership between the city of Coquitlam and Talitha Coombe, each owning their share of equity in the house. So there's really a very high degree of leverage for this project for the Affordable Housing Reserve Fund. And that's my presentation.
Thank you very much. I have 2 questions. Councillor Cirillo.
Well, I start by saying thank you for coming in, and I could talk to you for hours about this subject for sure. It's an unfortunate situation that violence against women still exists in our communities everywhere, regardless of socioeconomic, regardless of age. It's across everything, and it's not declining. Even globally, or the conflicts that are happening across the globe are just increasing. So I guess what I wanted to mention was this weekend I saw a newspaper article that talked about Craigslist advertising. Did you see this? Craigslist advertising free housing for women for in exchange for other things that they might be willing to give. So this one was basically saying Vancouver. This advertisement appeared in the rooms and share section of an online classified website offering free rent for the right girl. So I really do appreciate you bringing this in and highlighting it because, you know, it's predatory activity all the time that our women and children are exposed to, and this breaking the cycle for the kids is absolutely imperative. And I wanted to share this weekend, we had our Sir Optimist Western Canada Regional, and they awarded a lady a Live Her Dreams Award. She got it both at the Vancouver level and also at the regional level. And this was a woman that they tried to break the cycle. They put her into an adoptive home, but that didn't work out, and this person ended up being on the streets from age of 14, and they were exploited to the absolute maximum. But they were obviously got pregnant. There was a place for her to have her child, and it just changed the trajectory of her life. So I just wanted to take this opportunity to talk about violence against women and to say thank you very much for bringing this along. And I think it's very important to change the trajectory. We need to stop violence against women, period. And it would be my goal that we would do that before we have to house them, but I'll do what I can for now.
Great. Thank you. Councillor Reid.
Sandy, what was the homeless count this last year, 2015? Do you remember?
Well, Outreach, Hope Freedom Outreach does an estimate on an ongoing basis, and last October, November, they were between 80 and 100.
That's for the Tri-Cities.
That's for Tri-Cities, yeah. The Metro Vancouver count is done every 3 years. The last one was 2014, and that count I think was 54. But that's a 24.
It's much lower than
well,
that.
it's a 24-hour count, so it's it's going to miss.
Okay, well, let's take the 80. So then that would mean that 20, if 20, based on 25%, were women, I'm assuming that 20 of those would be occupying our 30-30 Gordon, 20 women?
I think that the number, I suspect the percentage is probably closer to 15%. And when 30-30 Gordon opened, the women's beds did not fill up right away until it would seem that word got around. We predicted and had confirmed that a number of the women who were seeking shelter were in alternative places at the time, where there's couch surfing. I don't know, but it took a while for those beds to fill up, but they did.
So do you know, just while I'm asking this question specifically about the women, but at 3030 Gordon, do you know that the needs of our community are being served, or are most of the people from out of area?
I would be very surprised if almost all of them are not from the Tri-Cities.
You think they all
I
are
do,
from
yes.
Tri-Cities?
Yes,
Thank
I
you
do.
very much.
Yeah.
Maybe I
That's
have.
what I think, Councillor Reid.
Okay.
I don't have any specific information.
Thank you.
Okay. Any further questions?
Can I just
Mayor Stewart?
There's an article in the Tri-City News about the mother and daughter
Yeah.
who are from Delta, I gather. And that's unfortunate because it does create the view that people are being sent here from other communities
Yeah.
rather than have the
So
facility.
that's an interesting situation. They moved from their rental accommodation in Delta, stayed in hotels for a while. I think they were closer to Tri-Cities. I can't tell exactly where, but how they got linked with 3030 Gordon was through Glenn Pollock, Councillor Pollock, who's the administrative assistant for Mike Farnworth.
Right.
Advocates for them went to Mike Farnworth's office as an MLA to see what could be done, and they weren't looking. What they're looking for was support. What they're looking for was affordable housing, ideally through BC Housing, and Glenn Pollock connected them with 3030 Gordon. So.
I'm not criticizing it, I'm just recognizing that the public gets a view from that kind of coverage, that it might well be that almost everybody is from someplace else rather than from local.
It
That's not the case.
It crossed my mind, yes.
Great. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you very much for coming in. I know this will be more discussion about this tonight. Thank you.
I'll see you tonight.
Thank you.
Item 4 is the proposed Community Amenity Contribution Program expansion, results of public consultation. We have introductory remarks from the General Manager, Planning and Development, and the report is before you for information.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, council members, or committee members, I guess, this afternoon. Just a few opening remarks. First, we're very pleased to be bringing forward this report today for committee, and it's in the report. It outlines the results from the recent consultation around that proposed expanded program, plus staff's intended next steps to bring this program forward. Council may recall that there's a report that you had received late last year talking about expanding the CAC, Community Amenity Contribution Program. Just so you're aware, right now the CAC program just applies to Coquitlam Lougheed. It was something that was put in place when we did the transit-oriented development strategy. The TDS is a bit of a trial basis, so it's in effect in Coquitlam Lougheed. The proposal now is to expand that citywide, but also, equally important, to take in single-family residential in addition to multifamily. The consultation process was undertaken early part of 2016, and it was a varied approach there. There was a project webpage, online survey, newspaper ads, social media, and we also held a developer builders information meeting back in March. Out of that, and as well, Andrew Merrill, who's the project team leader, the group, they sent out about 260 letters to a wide variety of builders, developers, community associations, and plus a lot of the groups that are in the sports and recreation areas. Out of that, we got back 30 online submissions plus 3 letters. Briefly, overall, there seems to be support for expanding the CAC program. We looked at it in the report here, broken it down by area of the city and level of degree of support, so I will go into the details there. But we think we're at a point now there's sufficient support for moving forward, and we just wanted to check in with committee today. Any feedback or questions you may have, and what we'd like to do is come back to council, the formal report with the policy there to expand the CAC system citywide to also include single family, and if council is in support of that, That would be passed by way of a council policy, and the timing for that, we'd like to get back by the end of May, and so it'd be ideally a June 1st, 2016 policy start date. But as we do with the development cost charge system, we'd be also proposing a one-year grandparenting scheme to allow for applications in process now to go through. In fairness, they don't change the rules in the middle of the game. And so there'd be a one-year grace period for those applications to go through. And then the policy would really kick in as of June 1st, 2017. Would be the sort of the schedule we're working to. So. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor O'Neill, then Councillor Reid, and
I just
myself.
want to understand this process here. You said that this is for questions and feedback from council. Short of a new show of hands from council opposing the whole process, what would this feedback accomplish? It's not going to be. You've already gone to the public and to developers with a proposed plan. If we were to give you feedback on what are you looking for that might actually influence the course of action, short of, I guess one thing, the majority of council could change their mind, obviously, and at this stage, and say, stop it, that's enough. But after that, is there anything council can say right now that's going to change anything you're doing going forward?
No, our intention was to report in today with committee. Here's what we heard out in the community from these various sources, and we've broken that down. We've laid out a proposed program going forward, but at the end of the day, it's because it would be ultimately a council policy if that's what council supports.
And then that gets voted on in council. But today, what would any feedback, before we go on for half an hour expressing opinions about this, is any feedback going to accomplish anything other than a change of mind of the 7 people on council to support this?
There's a whole number of variables. We believe that our proposal is well-founded, and we believe that the development community is thanking us for a well-thought-out program, but there's variables within there. The rate can be changed, the grandfathering period can be changed, and a number of other things can be changed. We believe that our proposal is reasonable, and we will be recommending this. But if council coalesced around some other aspect, the changes could be done. We believe that on complex issues like this, we should have a committee process first. If we had gone directly to council, we think that there would have been some potential criticism that there wasn't enough opportunity for discussion. We do not believe that there should be any changes because we believe it's well-founded.
So if there's any change that comes forward on those 2 or 3 things you mentioned at the beginning about when it's going to take effect, what the rate's going to be or anything like that, would that new plan then have to spark a new round of consultation with the development industry?
No.
Oh, it wouldn't. Okay.
Well, I mean, if it was so dramatic that, for example, if you doubled the rate, if you increased the rate, we would recommend that we do more consultation. But if you drop the rate, no. So it's a question of degree. If there was minor changes to it, we would say no. But if there were major, then maybe that would be a judgment call. It would really come down to the nature of the consensus if one is reached.
The one thing that, okay, thank you. So I understand the process a little more. And I'm a little hard-headed about this thing for reasons I think you understand. The one thing that maybe the developers and the people were like, they realize that there's really no point in asking this question, but I really still don't have a clear idea what will happen if a developer says, I'm not going to pay this. You say this is voluntary, I've got a good rezoning thing here, I'm not going to pay community amenities, I'm not going to sign a letter saying I voluntarily pay this because I feel I'm being forced to do this. To get my project through, and I still want my project to go through. It's a good project. What does the planning department do at that stage? Just by law, do you have to recommend, like if everything else is equal, you have to recommend, you've got to send it to council with a recommendation. And that recommendation, everything else being equal, will have to be to approve the rezoning, correct?
Sure. Yes, correct. It's unlike the bonus density system, which is set in place through the zoning bylaw, or the development cost charges are set in place through a DCC bylaw, where we're we're bound. I couldn't issue a building permit or approve a subdivision without collecting certain fees. In this case here, we would note when the application came forward to council at that time of rezoning that either they had agreed to contribute or not. And so at that point, Councillor, it's then really in council's bailiwick to decide.
I just wanted to make sure that was very clear, and the development industry knows that. Did you tell, was this question asked by the development industry, and did you tell them that?
It did come up, actually we had a really good session there, or the information session, and I think that was asked, and that was the way it was described, that this is not obligatory, but it's the city's policy.
Okay. So it's a public meeting now, so they didn't quite hear it before, they've heard it now, so thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Reid and then myself.
On reflection, I look at this and I listen to people in my industry and the community talking, and I've had time to peruse through my mind all these hairy things that happen. If I hear a lot from people saying that a lot of people resent the Burke Mountain area because they feel that their taxes are going up and a bunch of taxes are going to build stuff up there. And you can talk to people about bonus density and CACs and it's over their head because it's not something that they deal in. Is it possible to have this program so that it takes, and this is just a for instance, if it took Burke Mountain and all CACs developed in that area stay in there because we've got huge things to do. The CACs and the rest of and so let's say we could put from Raoul to say 10 years or something. All CACs stay in Burke Mountain for 10 years and then they go into the general pot after that. Or in Coquitlam, similar, maybe for 2 years. And then we just have a big general pot. Now, the reason I'm saying this is the most money that we're going to be spending right now, of course, is in the Greenfield Burke Mountain area where we have to develop parks and dig them and do all the other stuff. Whereas in central Coquitlam, we're enhancing parks and doing stuff like that. But the heavy load is pretty well done. So the reason I'm asking that is if within this bylaw, if we could, say, put 5 years or 10 years at Coquitlam and 15 years at Burke Mountain or something, that should take care of all the heavy lifting. The Y coming in, for instance, those CACs are going to go there and that's going to heavy lift that. But when I look at Burke Mountain and the community center we're looking at up there and the major parks and that, it makes total sense to me that the CACs up there could stay there, and that would be, I mean, we're going to have to put more money in, but at least the people building up there would know that their money is directly going in there and the list of things that it had to fund, and make it grandfathered at a certain time. Just a question.
No, it's a real fundamental question, and you get that as a basis of equity. First thing I just want to emphasize, though, because remember, the system is in place for Coquitlam Low-Heat.
Oh, yeah, I know
We're committed because we're paying for a community center, so we've got $25 million to collect there. So
Exactly.
That will take care of funds from there for a long time.
But Burke Mountain?
But Burke Mountain, no, that's very true. The approach we've taken here is, I guess, analogous to, well, the way the city collects general revenue taxes across the community, spent across the community.
Yeah.
Development cost charges collected across the community, spent across the community.
But CACs are voluntary. I'm just going where Terry is too. So if they're voluntary, why can't those stay in an area where there's the most development and we know that we're going to be needing them?
I'm just trying to explain the principle the staff have taken to this approach. Certainly we've heard from the developers, they go, well, you know, Mr. Planner, I'd be more willing to pay CACs if I knew that money was being taken and spent on that park down the street.
Yeah.
Because it helps me in marketing. We hear you. At this point, what our recommendation is, again, similar to how the city's general revenue around property taxes, around the DCCs, is to put those in the CACs into a central fund that would then be, our recommendation is be targeted primarily to the Parks and Rec master plan, so projects and works across the city would then be looked at on an as-needed priority basis. you could set it up such that it would be each area generates funds and benefits, but you may find other areas will be left behind. And that would be also the concern. Like right now, unfortunately, there's not a lot happening in Mayardville in other areas. And so there may be a little bit of an imbalance there between where funds are collected and where they're spent. At the end of the day, that's council's decision to make, because I think the program would be through the annual budgeting process when Park, Rec, and Culture bring forward these projects.
Jim, I think we've had this conversation, and I get it. My thing was, it's how often, well, Surrey's doing it, but how often does a city take a third of their city, I guess, in the end, when it's built out, and it's plunked brand new somewhere, and it's going to need a whole whack of stuff that the rest of the cities already have. So I really wonder if we shouldn't be doing something for 5 or 10 years to bank up that. And the money for Millardville, we've got Place Millard. We've set money aside, but I mean those CACs can give us that money back to general revenue. So
it's not unheard of, and I know where I started my career in Kelowna, they had areas that had huge needs for infrastructure, so they set the DCC rates very, very high there. The money that was generated there was spent on the sewers and water side areas. So it can be done. It's at the end of the day, it's council policy.
I'm bringing this up because it's voluntary. It's voluntary. As Terry says, it's voluntary. So if I'm going to build out there and you want me to volunteer some funds, then I want to see a couple of posies and a tree built next door. Done.
Okay, thank you. I've got myself on the list next. I'm going to follow up on the same. My understanding is when CACs were invented, they've been around for a few years, not here in Coquitlam, but they were truly a volunteer. In a lot of cases, it was a developer that traded, you give me some extra density and I'll make a contribution to an amenity in this area, recognizing that they were going to put more people into that area. So my understanding is, going back to the early days of when this sort of started in different cities, that it was tied to a specific project, and that maybe it wasn't fully voluntary, but it was a way of ensuring that a project went ahead and that it wasn't a drain on the rest of the community. Often I hear that our taxes are going up. Residents will say, our taxes are going up because we've got to pay for all the stuff on Burke Mountain. The flip side of that is to be able to say, no, the developers that are developing there are making an additional contribution to that. So that's the flip side to it. It also means that if money is directed into an area, it frees up other money to do the other things around the city. I mean, at the end of the day, it is one pot. But I think, because what you spend from this pot means you don't have to use money from over here to do it. To Councillor Reid's point, we have set aside money for Place Mayardville. We're using bonus density to do the Y. We've got a number of, CACs rather, to do the Y. So we've got the CACs going there. So we have projects underway in different parts of the city, but we know we have some big projects coming up on Burke because that's where the growth is. And so it seems to me a logical match is we have needs because of growth, and we have the opportunity to make voluntary contributions to offset some of those needs. So I still like the idea of trying to sort of tie it to a bit. The other thing is on the, and again, to everybody's point, if it's voluntary, I think they're more likely to want to voluntarily put it up to benefit some of their development, the spur growth, the spur value in their projects. The other point that I had is, if development takes, if I've read this correctly, if a development takes place in an older part of Coquitlam, say Mayardville, and you knock down a house and you build a new house in the same spot, CACs would come in effect between the difference of the old house, because it's not a square footage place on single family. It doesn't square footage. There's no credit back. It's only if two lots are created where there was only one, or maybe you could just walk us through how that part works.
Sure. No, it's a little intricate. But again, what we're recommending is a process that would mirror some development cost charge bylaw. We're trying to be consistent, and the development cost charge bylaw is based on black and white legislation, and that is that say you have a lot there in Mayardville, there's a house on it, and it's of a certain size, and that is going to be demolished, no heritage value.
Yep.
And it's going to be replaced by a 3-story apartment building. The area of that house, the floor area of that house, would then be a credit against that apartment building. Right. Just the same with the DCCs. It's not fair to double count. The second scenario would be you're a little further west of that. You've got a large enough lot. You can go to the housing choices and you can divide it into 2 lots. You'd get credit for the first house on the first lot, just the same way you would with your development cost charges, but you would pay, under this proposed program, the CACs for that second lot.
Right. Okay. So if you go to a townhouse or something bigger, there's a number of other things that kick in.
Basically, it's floor area.
Right, floor area. Okay. If you have one house on a large lot and you knock it down and you build a bigger house, the large house or the monster house, whatever you want to call it, is there a CAC on that?
No. The CAC system is predicated on a rezoning, and that's where the voluntary
Right.
aspect comes in, because it's going from a rezoning, this land use, this density, to a higher density.
Right.
So in that, there's...
Right. And during that rezoning, if the lot is split in half, are there park fees, the park acquisition fees? So there's no park acquisition fees split, so just the CAC. But if you go up into the northeast and you take an acre and you split it into 10 lots, you would pay park charges on each of those lots, and you would pay volunteer pay CACs on those lots as well.
And development cost charges.
And everything. So what would, and maybe we don't need it now off the top of your head, but it'd be interesting when this report comes forward, is what would those fees be on those single-family lots? My guess is that what the report said was at 5,000, I don't have the number right in front of me, it was, depending on the size of the lot, but it was around 5,000 in a CAC on a lot.
5,500 for above 375.
5,500 or?
And 4,800 for below 375 square meters.
Okay. That would be in addition to the park charges. My understanding of if a lot up there is going for $500,000, the park fee would be $25,000 would be the park contribution for that lot, correct? About 5%?
It's a little more complicated than that. It's the value of the land at subdivision. And we can come back with some more numbers for you.
But that's a fee that's applied to single family where it's more than one. Because a straight division that we're seeing up in Burquett, we've got a couple that have come forward in Mayardville, there's not park charges. But when a piece of land gets to a certain size, there's a park charge that's applied to it. So they're actually, those lots are making, those developers of those lots are making a fee that's not included in our table. So I'd just like to sort of see where that fits in, because multifamily and rezoning that, they don't pay those park fees. So I'm concerned about the amount that we're putting on to single-family residential, given in those cases they're already making a park contribution that's not factored in. And my guess is that park contribution is already greater or equal to what these CACs could be in those lots.
We'd have to run the numbers.
I'd like to see maybe just a couple of scenarios, just to see. In general, I'm supportive of the whole thing. I think we need to sort of look at what the amounts are, because when I look at the amounts that we were proposing to charge on single family and multifamily, I think that when you start to factor in the park thing, it now puts a greater burden onto the single family in relationship to the others.
We wrestle with that ourselves at the staff level. We're coming up with a program, discussing, debating options, and there was that recognition. But the 5% cash in lieu, that's the mechanism you're pointing to, is where there isn't a park identified in the OCP, so there's just recognize that residential puts a demand on parks, so that's a funding source that helps PRC go out and buy the necessary parts. So.
Yeah, and an important funding source, and absolutely, if you're creating extra lots, you're now creating towards parks.
The CAC is also then focused on other the things you can't fund through development cost charges or the 5%.
Yeah, and so I think we just have to recognize what the fees are. To me, CACs are going to provide amenities for people. And right now they tend to be focused on floor space or building lot size, where in actual fact, and we don't really have a method of charging, doing a head count on what you're billing for, but recognizing that you are probably going to be paying more per square foot in some of these, and then you could argue yes, but you're going to have different densities on the property. Mm-hmm. But to me, I think that I'd really like to look and see how those numbers work out on that. And I think that was sort of my 2 points. As I said, in general, I think we have the infrastructure needs. We have to find a way to pay for it. I've heard out in the community that they think it's a way of ensuring that new residents, and yes, it will add to the cost of housing, or whether it's single family or multifamily, but this is a way for new residents moving in to contribute into the community, whereas residents who've lived here for 40 years have been making those payments through their taxes, and that this is sort of a way of playing catch-up, if you will.
Precisely, and I guess that again is underpinning why recommending going citywide. So all developments from one end of the Coquitlam to the other, self-pay, full its freight. It goes to works and amenities that can't be funded through DCCs, as we discussed. But also equally, it's to be crystal clear up front. It's not a negotiated process. And that's the criticism you hear in other municipalities. They go in the back room with the staff and they get worked over. And no, this is all up front so people know what they're getting into.
And that's perfect. We've heard that about our DCCs. So I think that's good. So those are my points that I'm going to. I've got Councillor Towner, Councillor Asmussen, and Councillor Marsden. Councillor Towner. I've got you after Chair. Okay.
Thanks. Mine's a fairly quick question, I think. It's just something unclear for me on page 3. It says approximately 9% of respondents felt that the city should have already have a citywide CAC program in place. But then it says the level of support for the program expansion varied from support to don't know or unsure. So I read that as, well, if they think we should have already had one in place, wouldn't they automatically support it? So I was curious about that. Am I reading it wrong, or is it unclear?
Sorry, I know when I review the draft that
General public.
we should have been clear on the numbers. The numbers are smaller and they're sort of a little bit obscure because some of that's being drawn from the open responses part of the survey. It wasn't direct questions, so you get kind of a smattering of feedback. I'm sorry, it's not the best.
The survey has a written section, and then it has a couple sections where it's yes, no, and then the level of support.
And there's general comments, and that's some of the general comments.
They don't really understand what they are. That's
right. Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay. I've got Councillor Asmussen and then Marsden.
Well, thank you. I'm going to talk about consultation. When I looked at this and we got the consultation back, we have 4 letters in support, basically, of the proposal going forward, and no real letters showing against. But you're saying to me out of all the 135, 160 people, we only got 4 responses back from emails or letters? I'm sure I know some people who had to send in other
33 responses.
But we only have 4 here.
3 letters and 30 of the online submissions.
And the online submissions.
Yeah, but even still, I mean, that's what most people do. So I just find that a little, when I look at this and I look at, Coquitlam Field Sports, yeah, they're going to support because they want, I mean, that's a no-brainer. I mean, they're not affected by the collection of it. That's going to be in that. When I looked at some of the way this report was packaged together, it's a very positive pro-CAC report, not showing any negativity towards CACs in there. When I look at the other people in here, I think, when you talk about voluntarily, large developers in particular feel threatened by city slowing up their project, cost them money, so sometimes it's easier to say, look, we got too much invested, we're going to pay for this. Now, the other caveat that I've heard out in the industry, and I want to make clear and find that out here, most of the industry people have said, and we've had discussions, that once the CAC goes in, that's it. There's no more negotiations on anything else. So when we have a CAC go in, we're paying a charge on all these properties, city's collecting the money, so there's no more tot lots being put in by our expect. There's no more trails being given up free. Is that the intent of the CAC? That it will then operate purely as, because we talked about, Craig said you had this negotiation before, you go in a room, people negotiate some specific their project, developers not like that. So some of the developers told me, said if you go to CAC pure, that part will end. Is that true?
By and large, yes. The CAC should be a system that stands above all. And with that, too, as with density bonusing, is works in kind. As I said, we will build this for you. Can you give us a credit? That question gets raised. It hasn't really been landed on. But also, the other side, though, too, you'd have to look at each application, and we've got a couple going through right now, which are very different land use changes, proposed compared to what the plan called for. So are there other needs or other benefits that would be sought through that process?
So basically what you're saying is that CACs do not stop this. They will, in situations, I mean, the other part about in kind, okay? If I'm a developer of a townhouse or other projects, I have units and stuff where I can offset my costs or the in kind in a way that if you're taking a single family home developer, it doesn't have the same option of in kind or working with that cost. So it's not an equal street in that direction that you're putting it into. So basically by your answer is that, well, CACs will be here, and at times we will be looking for extras from a developer on top of CACs. That's basically the answer.
Yeah, the way I would describe it is they will reduce it but not eliminate it, because there's other aspects in terms of bringing things forward, but it will provide a funding stream to be able to do things, but there will still be the odd case where things will have to be negotiated, and that is covered off in the report at the bottom of page 4.
Well, when I look at this report, and I hope to make sure to when I look at this is about proposed community expansion, results of public consultation. So all we're really talking about today, what I led off with, is about public consultation. This is not the report of the debate about our positions or all the changes we made. This is just about consultation.
That's right.
So my point, though, just to respond to some of the other comments about this, is that when we talk about, let's say, Burke Mountain, and you talk about different things, what we're creating is two classes of taxpayers. You have existing taxpayers, and you have taxpayers who are going to be new, who are going to be paying taxes like the existing taxpayers, but are going to pay an extra charge for amenities. And we've done all through our history in this city, we've provided almost all our facilities through taxpayer funding, maybe some density bonus and stuff, through the whole community shares. And now what we're saying is we're no longer going to be a universal tax to this. We're going to tell the people in the new area, you got to fund most of it yourself, but we're still going to spend money through tax dollars in the older areas to rebuild, replace, just like we did with the arena, the forum, the pool, and everything else. So you're creating, those people will come in and pay taxes for all that type of stuff, or Place Millard will out of their taxes, and still have to contribute more for their services in their areas. We're not creating an equitable, universal system for all residents here. We're creating two classes of residents. So this is my difficulty with this whole program going forward, is that it is not creating equity between the taxpayers. You can argue about Burke Mountain right now developing, but most of the infrastructure there is being paid by developers. When I first lived up in Burke Mountain, and may remember this, we would come to have the roads paved or anything. We were told, no, you can't have your roads repaid because development will take care of that. People in Burke Mountain didn't have any services, but they paid for ACC, the Pori, all the facilities in the old Coquitlam, and their taxes went towards paying. So is there an equity saying, well, you guys didn't get it for years, now it's your turn? And that's what I thought, and that's why my opposition to CACs comes down to is a couple of things. One is voluntary, and you can't predict them, and it's actually, I would say if you want to do that, you could, I'll get into that argument later, but there's problems with that in collecting the money if everybody says not to pay it. And that's where the development community has fears about having to pay it because they don't want to not have their project go through. But the second part is you're creating two types of taxpayers. You're taking existing taxpayers who get benefit of all the services. Remember, all the services benefit all the people in Coquitlam. Those services that are built new in Northeast don't just benefit the person, because people from all of Coquitlam go use them, just like people from all of Coquitlam go down and use the pool, go down and do the arena. So that's my fundamental problem with CACs, is you're selecting a certain group and charging them more. And it's a great source of money for councils to not have to raise taxes. And that's the biggest issue underneath this, is councils not wanting to raise taxes, as we should, to provide the facilities overall in the universal tax system. So, but on this report of the community amenity contract, the public consultation, I think it is a bit flawed because it doesn't provide any of the negative comments back in here. It doesn't provide all the information that should have been in here about the other parts to it. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Councillor Marsden next.
Thank you. Well, I'll start by saying I was a little surprised this was coming to us in committee, because I thought the direction from council is fairly clear that we're going to go away, get the consultation, and we'd come back with some form of bylaw without having to go through this step. But we're taking the extra step. I thought wasn't, again, this appeared to be an extra step to me because I thought the direction was fairly clear that go out, let's get the information and move forward. In terms of where we're at with this, I think what you've landed on is a good, solid solution. Clearly, we need the revenue streams to deliver the services the residents want. The options are don't deliver some of the services. Cut back on some of the parks pieces, cut back on some of the rec pieces. And I don't think we've heard from anybody that we want to do that. So from the development community to see fairly clearly that they say, you know what, this is, at least we know exactly what the numbers are. We're not having to go into a back room and ask to see our pro forma and then find out, okay, what's the profit, and we want all but 5% or 10%. At least they can build a pro forma knowing there's certainty to the cost. So I think there's some good pieces there. So I am supportive of that. I appreciate the comments made about the voluntary component of it. Is there potential with pushback on that? There absolutely is. But again, I think as you've seen with the largest developer we have that's doing that business here in Coquitlam and from the UDI itself, they're fairly comfortable in the space that you've landed. So I think that's positive. In terms of use and community benefit, and Councillor Asmussen has just touched on the fact that, you know what, you can build it in a certain area, but it could be used anywhere. Anybody in the community could be. We saw it with Queenston Park. It was built in the Northeast, but people from all over the place are utilizing it, young families, because of the amenities that it has. So while I recognize that we certainly want to develop and build in certain areas, my experience with foundations and is that if you try to segment too thinly where the money can be used and how it can be used, you wind up with money that sits in an account that there really isn't a specific need for or enough money or will to execute a project. So I think having that flexibility for staff to say, you know what, the funds are available, the CACs to make this project in this area work, I think having that flexibility and giving that to staff is the right direction to go. So that's what I'm reading, that you'd have that ability, a desire to utilize it in a neighborhood, but not a specific requirement that there'd be no transfer.
Mr. Chairman, got to correct on that point. No, it's not there for staff to decide.
Well, council obviously has the ultimate decision, yes.
And a couple of things, if I could, just to recognize that, like, for example, the Parks Rec Master Plan, like it's a multi-year, many decades, over $300 million. CACs is projected to generate roughly a third of that money, so there's still other funds that are necessary. So a lot of taxpayer dollars still have to be found, or grants, or whatever. So it's a partial funding source. And certainly, you can set, at the end of the day, the council decides how the money is collected and where the money is set. You can, for example, our VCC program, we're bound to put the money collected for roads go into that reserve. For water goes into that reserve. Sanitary, that reserve. And, you can't mix them up. You could set reserves for CAC by area and then spend the money in those areas, but yeah, there's a flip side to that too.
Yeah, I encourage caution on that part, because again, you slice it too thinly, and as a treasurer of a foundation previously, I sat there looking, saying, well, great, this money is earmarked for X, but there's not enough money to complete it, and so the money just sits there until such time as it accumulates to be enough. So I think having that flexibility where staff can make that request of council to clarify it in terms of where the funding streams are, I think is the appropriate way to go. So I think you've landed on a good space here. I think it does give certainty, and it helps us build the full community that people are asking for. So, okay, good work. Thank you.
Mayor Stewart.
My concern actually is when we set up a disincentive for the stuff we want built, and I think we have that now. I look at the fourth bullet on page 4, the second fourth bullet, not the top one, the bottom ones. The proposed expanded CAC is transparent and will be consistently applied to all new residential developments citywide that requires rezoning. Much like the city's PCC program, is therefore appropriate that all development participate in the program and there not be exemptions. Well, there's one big exemption, that's single family, because it doesn't need rezoning. As a result, if I have a big lot and I want to build 6,000 square feet, I don't pay any fees, and I don't put in sidewalks, and I don't put in lighting, and I don't put in, I don't do anything. I just build my house. If I want to build 6,000 square feet in one building, but if I want to build it in 4, if I want to do what we beg them to do, we do the housing choices and build 6,000 square feet, we're going to ding them for about $100,000 in DCCs and CACs. Because they're still building 6,000 square feet. Their impact on our community is exactly the same or even less, but they're doing it in a way that we asked them to. They're doing it in smaller units, and we've got to get away from this. And so I'm really opposed to the idea that we would go further than DCCs on the housing choices product. And so I don't care if it says we ought to have no exemptions. We have to counter the big exemption that we have, which is we can't financially disincentivize better densities than single family. We know that single family doesn't compete with multifamily. If someone's going to get townhouse zoning, they're going to build townhouses. But if they can have single family or housing choices, right now they're choosing single family in droves because they can make a lot of money at it and they pay fewer fees. So I'm hopeful, and probably a whole lot of timing issues too. 2 months to get a permit instead of a year. So I throw it to you.
Just very briefly, that's a dilemma that we've discussed before, and we recognize there's a fundamental inequity there. There's another piece of work that's underway right now. It's looking at trying to level that playing field a little bit. The reality is the CAC system is based on a rezoning. If someone wants to take advantage of the existing zoning to build a single-family house, or this isn't the tool to deal with that. But we are looking at least the servicing and frontage implications of that type of construction.
Again, let's set aside the serving and frontage stuff, but I think we need to contemplate an exemption for housing choices, pure and simple, if we can't apply the CAC charges to single family, or else make DCCs by the foot once and for all. We fought for that in the 90s to have DCCs by the square foot. We got permission from the NDP government at the time to have DCCs by the square foot. We still charge by the lot, by the parcel, and maybe at single family we have to go by the, well, we can't do DCCs on single family anyway, but have DCCs by the foot, so that 6,000 square feet at least isn't paying for 4 houses. It's paying for one, for the equivalent in single family. So, but recognizing that that's a conversation about DCCs, not about CACs, but we've got to remove the disincentive. We're putting too much financial barrier into the choices we want them to make.
Councillor O'Neill.
So I'm just going to get back to the process question at the beginning now. There's been several critiques or ideas or suggestions from Councillor Asmussen, Councillor Reid, the Mayor, about changes. We haven't had a show of hands on any of them. We haven't had a vote on any of them. And lacking that, you'll go away and saying, well, I guess we're going to plunge ahead. The Mayor has a very good idea. At least Councillor Reid has a very good idea. Councillor Asmussen, a great idea. So I just let that sit for a second here. Towards the end of Councillor Hodges' address and questions, he had a statement that said, quote, yes, it will add to the cost of housing, said the community amenity contribution, but it has these benefits. And the general manager answered, yes, precisely. Were you answering yes, precisely to the entire statement that Councillor Hodge made, that yes, you are, in fact, affirming that CACs will add to the cost of housing?
I don't think my response was focused on that. I think it was answering the other part of the question about the use of the funds.
Okay, so you're just that's fine. I want a clarification because it was a declaration. You didn't qualify your answer, but you might have just been answering the but part of it, where he looked at the benefits of the CAC.
And in our previous report, because this question was come up before too, about the implications for housing affordability, or the cost of housing, and we've done some preliminary work. It was in the earlier report on that, so we can pull that out again.
Well, I know there's been discussions around this issue before. I don't think I've heard a declaration from the planning department before that yes, this will add to the cost of housing. And I'm just seeking clarification there. Councillor Hodge believes it will, but that's offset by benefits. I believe it will, and I don't think the benefits offset the decrease in affordability, the consequence of an imposition of CSE, and that's been my main point of opposition throughout. So we agree on the first part of that statement, and we disagree on the but part. And I just we look to you for guidance, and in terms of that part of it, you're just saying now you didn't intend to say definitely that it would add to the cost of housing. You're not ready to say that one way or the other?
I'm just recalling from our earlier report on that, because again, that question had been raised, and we went away and we looked at it, had some discussions, and did some basic analysis and reported back that yes, it's an additional cost, but the percentage was fairly modest compared to other costs. And it gets into a complicated area where there's costs that add up, but also there's a market price. And so do costs set that price, or does the market set the price?
Yeah, if I could wait it.
But actually, if I could just wait on my comment was, I was referring to the cost of creating housing, not necessarily the final price. And we've had that debate before about whether it's today's landowner, the person building the house, or the person buying the house. But it is an increase the cost, whether it's like the price of 2x4s go up. I mean, there's a cost built in. Who pays it? I'm not sure. But it's a charge that would be there today that hasn't been there in the past. So I was referring to the cost of creating housing.
I just wanted to build on that because it's the timing of it, whether or not it comes out of the cost of the land or not, and if enough notification is given, it generally comes out of the cost of the land because the market is the market, not the market, so that would be, and that's why we're giving a year grace period to sort of so that encourages it more to come out of the price of the land as opposed to the final price.
So I'm just seeking some more clarification on General Manager's response to another council member's statement. The mayor talked about how he thought it would be unfair to have these CACs put onto housing choices, smaller cottage homes, big lot times 4 if you put 4 on a lot. And I believe you said that yes, you recognize that there's a fundamental inequity involved in that, but you believe that inequity pales next to some of the benefits, I guess. But you did say you recognize there is a fundamental inequity there.
Okay. If I can, Mr. Chairman, let me clarify that point. What I was responding to there is the situation, the scenario where there's an existing lot southwest Coquitlam. Some housing choices designated area in the official Canadian plan as RS1 zoning. The property owner can then, do I go through an application and subdivide it into 2 lots? Do I even get a little more ambitious and hire a designer and do a triplex or a fourplex and go through that lengthy process of rezoning and development permit and paying all these fees? Or do I just go and get my cousin builder and put up a big house? And in that house, we're going to only have 1 suite. We're going to have a couple of suites. And we're going to sell it for almost $2 million. And we haven't paid any CACs. We haven't paid any development cost charges. And right now, we're getting away with not doing any frontage improvements. So that's the dilemma that we're wrestling with, because we've got a system, we've got an area of the community where we're trying to encourage that sensitive infill, that intensification through the housing choices. But it seems we're stacking up these disincentives for that. And so that going the other route of building a large single-family house, as you're entitled to under the zoning, meets the building code, that's all we can ask for.
Okay, so I'm going to get back to just my first statement of my second round here, and that was with the specific feedback and that you've heard. Since this was really just for information to us and a little bit of feedback, and it would take a major thing for you to change course, Is the report that, after hearing this and seeing no motions or anything, is the report that you are now going to deliver to us going to be also the policy statement that's going to come to Open Council? That's going to now be fundamentally unchanged from the plan here, despite there's various different things from different people. But has been anything to change your course that you've heard today?
Actually, I think it's appropriate that we do check in with council today. Obviously, there's some differing views around the table. And as we've encountered with other things like housing affordability and liquor licensing, and we may need to get into a process where there's some questions put to council. So exercising your...
I'm going to answer this a little bit differently. In the absence of a motion, we are bringing back a report recommending the program as outlined. If there is enough consensus to change it, I would ask for a motion.
So whenever anybody moves to receive this report, I'm going to vote against receiving this report as a signal to saying we need to talk about this more. We need to talk about some of the specific ideas that have come up. So that's how I'm going to handle it.
Myself, I think there's some new information and new questions coming forward, and we may want to treat this like we've treated a couple of other ones, where you may want to bring forward a couple of options to sort of define where we're going, because I don't know that I'd want to get this unless, we can do a straw poll and sort of say if everybody's happy with the way it is, and you might get 5, you might get more, or do we want to look and sort of say a couple of the options? Some of the things I've heard is the concerns around the spending the money, in the community, or if there's a way to sort of set a priority or waiting system. That may be one that I sense some discussion around. The fee structure is another one. Just the mayor mentioned about whether we apply it to where we're trying to encourage a density and smaller homes and more affordable homes. That's one. I'd certainly like to see how the actual fee structure works out. Particularly, I noticed that here in the report it says that it wouldn't apply over 2.5 FSR. I'm assuming that's because that's where bonus density kicks in.
That's correct.
So I agree. So we don't want to have CACs overlapping with bonus densities, but have we looked at, do we want CACs overlapping where we have park acquisition funds? To me, we sort of say on one hand we don't want an overlap here, but so maybe we want to look at what those numbers look like. That maybe there's a slightly different fee where you have park acquisition money coming in, but so I just sort of think there may be some opportunities to sort of look at the structure. For me, I think we need to do it. I think the community wants it. I think the building community has said yes, but with a couple of concerns that I read in the letters, and so I think that maybe there's a little bit of tweaking to do, but I don't know. To Councillor O'Neill's point, is this just a yes or no, go ahead? Or is there something from today's conversation that you want to take back and present some options before we go to the final bylaw?
First, it isn't a bylaw, it's a policy.
But I guess it would, or policy, yes.
There's others that want to speak around the table, but if there is direction from council today to have this question, what about this and what about that, we can get into that more detailed process around just nailing this policy, because now they want council support for this policy.
And from my perspective, we've been at this for a long time. We've had consultation. If council wants to wade into it with a series of questions, like we've done in some other things, and that was a result of the policy failing, we need a very clear motion that basically says we do not accept this program as is, and we want you to come back with a series of questions which will likely delay the program being implemented for 4 to 5 months. One of the comments that I would say is perfection is the enemy of the good. We have nothing now on this segment of the organization. We have some huge funding issues with respect to the Parks Master Plan, but if council's not comfortable with it, then we should take more time. I'm comfortable with the program is generally good enough. We can always adjust it. This is not a bylaw. This is a policy that we can adjust as we go. You shouldn't do too many adjustments, though. So if you're fundamentally uncomfortable, then let's talk about it. But what I've heard is individual commentary on individual issues. I have not heard a consensus of a majority of council. So if you want us to do something different, we need a motion to say, not accept this program and bring back a series of questions along the lines of what is done to do that. I'm not recommending that. I'm recommending we go ahead as it is, because we've had lots of discussion, we've had consultation. What I'm getting from the development community is this is a better program than most of them that they see out there in the communities and other organizations. That would be my comment.
So we could do this as, I would hate if somebody felt strongly on one issue to vote against or to say don't go move forward. So I'm just sort of trying to find out the best way to move forward. Is it an all or nothing, as you've suggested? I've heard one councillor suggest that they will not support the recommendation. I'd like to have everybody supporting the recommendation to go forward, but recognizing what the city manager has said, that if we start to tinker and bring this back, we delay the whole thing at a time that we know our needs are there. So I guess at this point we can throw it open to council. We can sort of say, I guess the first opinion, I guess we could do a straw poll and sort of say, is everybody comfortable moving ahead with a vote, or do we want to have more information and a sort of a second step with a breakdown? And if everybody's comfortable moving ahead, then we'll just put the recommendation on the floor and go for it. Councillor Reid. Sorry, I did have Councillor Wilson here.
I fully support this. I think we got to move on. I think as long as we can adjust it and improve it as we go on, it makes total sense. I don't agree with the two classes of residents. I don't agree that we're putting $10 million in Place Millardville and that's enough. It's never going to be enough. It's going to be at least double that, which the CACs could go towards funding. Has anybody worked out what percentage this is on a $1.2 million house? It's like 0.35%, right? It's minuscule. It's nothing, right? It's not going to increase the cost of housing. It's fair to me. This is just like the DCCs, but it gives us more flexibility and it allows us to put the money towards something that the province doesn't allow us to with DCCs. So I'm fully supportive of this. I would love for it to go through today. And I didn't say anything all along because I didn't think it was going to be a problem. But if this is going to be a problem, I just want to put it on record.
Councillor Reid.
Well, I think it should go ahead today, but I have one clarifying question, and I don't know who it's to, but I'll address it to Jim. Could we amend it to say that the disbursement of funds is still to be increased, is still to be dealt with, meaning that we can collect them, and then if we decide at a later date we want to.
Definitely. What I would suggest is that we collect it citywide, but if you want equity, every budget you could ask for a breakdown of the recommended distribution of funds with the general understanding that that generally it be spent in accordance with where it was raised. But that is a guideline, not a rule.
So we don't need to put it in the recommendation. We don't want to get trapped, like Dennis said, we don't be trapped in these orphan funds. So generally over time, we want to keep that in mind. If that's what council says, we can report back on that each year as we go. But with the acknowledgement, as says in the report, the poorer neighborhoods may well be left behind, so we are not recommending that. But if council wants that, you should make that a tag on. But we've thought about that, and we have said, no, we're not doing that, because the areas that aren't having huge development, like Millardville, that need some extra improvements will be left behind. And so we have thought, we are not recommending that. But if council wants us to do that, there's nothing wrong with reporting out on it, to do the ongoing distribution of funds, just as a reporting out thing, so you can see as we go every year. Maybe that's to make this a little quicker. We can get a report back on where the funds come in and where we want to spend them. And I do not have to put that in the recommendation, Jim? No. No? Okay, fine. I'll move the recommendation.
Second.
Councillor O'Neill on the list.
So I don't see why anybody who has a caveat or wants to have the sort of idea that May has, can't do that when we get the policy back for council to talk about. That can be added on and talked about and amended there.
Yes.
This is a report to receive. This is the recommendation is to receive a report, and I've got such big concerns with the overall issue and philosophy behind it, and the consequences of it that I'll do my best to stop it right now. But I didn't have a specific fix. I don't want to get into specifically fixing this. I want it to go away. So that's why I'm not putting forward anything. But as I said 10 minutes ago, I'll show my displeasure by voting against receipt of this report.
Okay.
And if the majority of people do that, then we're going to have another exercise.
Right. Okay, it's moved by Councillor Wilson. I heard seconded by me. Or moved by Councillor Reid, and it was, I think I had Councillor Wilson, and I heard a couple of people second it, but let's call, sorry, Mayor Stewart.
So what would the staff's recommendation be for if we were to tackle the issue of the possibility that CAC on housing choices would become a deterrent? I mean, there's only one area where we see the potential for a CAC to become a deterrent. We know that DCCs per unit they harm small units. Parking per unit harms small units. We know those disincentives are structurally in there if we do stuff by unit versus by square foot, and with housing choices, I think we can have the effect of shutting down a program or at least reducing take-up by 15 or 20%, and so we end up with more monster houses. So how could we go forward with at least having the choice at some point, finding out what the financial cost would be of exempting the housing choices that we did for last year, for example?
Mr. Chair, first, it should be noted that the housing choices projects that are going forward now in Coquitlam Lougheed pay CACs. So they're subject to that right now.
No, I understand.
And so one of the things we have on our work program this year is a housing choices review. And we're looking at that full form of development. How's it doing? Whether it's failures, successes, what are the issues facing that development form. In that, I would like for the staff group that are doing that work is actually reach out and have those conversations with some of the developers that went through that process. And so we can look at, from a cost perspective, CACs on top of DCCs, on top of site frontage improvements. Is it overwhelming? So it can be looked at through that study as well.
There's two ways of equalizing things. One is the review that Jim talks about. The other is the looking at how single-family homes, the monster homes as it were, pay for things, and we are doing a review on discontinuous frontage works, and there's a variety of ways of doing that, and to date, it is right now they don't have to do anything. Not only this, they don't have to do sidewalks, they don't have to do curbs and a variety of other things, and we've got a report coming forward, which I've reviewed numerous drafts, it's still not ready, but we are having a report coming forward to try to, through the building bylaw, even though it's not rezoning, to have them pay some kind of a cash in lieu or something like that system, and there's a number of different aspects to it, to provide some of the improvements. We could add the CAC into that so that it reduces the inequity. The problem with that is if you make it too big, that increases the potential opposition on that front, and so I believe in taking baby steps in terms of decreasing the inequity, and we are taking some steps to decrease the inequity, and that report's going to come to you in about 2 months. And if you want at that time to add that onto that report, we're not going to do it at the staff level, but that would be an appropriate place to decrease that inequity. So there's two options. There's Jim's review on the housing choices thing, and there's this review, and the goal of those would be to reduce the inequity, because what I've said over and over again is we have to reduce the incentives to do the thing which we don't want them to do. And I'm preaching the same thing you are in terms of these staff reviews. I think those reviews are a better place to deal with that inequity than this review.
And as you know, I'm absolutely waiting with anticipation for those things to come back. But I see a report here that proposes to put in place another disincentive, that's all. And I wanted us to be cognizant that we're doing that, because we may find ourselves 2 months from now adopting something like this, and then 3 months from now adopting another report that tries to fix it. And I'd rather us fix it.
Yes, we're doing the other report to fix it irrespective of this one.
Yeah, granted, and there are other issues, but ultimately what we're going to be doing is making it so that fixing those other issues isn't going to help at all, other than the builders are going to keep building single family, and we're not going to get any. We're going to lose a whole bunch of the potential for choices.
Good. I have Councillor Morrison, Councillor Sorrell.
Thank you. Good discussion around it. The only compelling comment I've heard that say, slow down a little bit would be Mayor Stewart's with regards to how it deals with housing choices. But that being said, I don't think we slow down for that. I think we move forward with this. I think it's the right thing to do. We can certainly address that as part of the housing choices. As Councillor Wilson has said, this is a small amount in terms of the overall value of a home. A very, very small amount. And granted, every little bit counts. But I think in terms of housing choices, there's perhaps other things that need to come to the fore. This probably isn't going to prevent somebody from moving forward with the housing choices program, because the market, in terms of marketability, in terms of overall return to a developer, is probably greater on a housing choices piece than it is on a single family detached 6,000 square foot home. So the risk is less, or at least is put across a greater spectrum. So I don't think this would stop it. So I don't think it should stop us from moving forward. I think we need to move forward with this. I think, as we said, most communities are in place with some form of CAC. We've heard from the development community that by and large this is the most transparent that's out there. And they're willing to accept. They just want to ensure that we're executing on the usage of it, and I support that. So I think let's move this forward. Thanks,
Councillor Cirillo.
Mine is not about the content of the report; it's about the process again. So I just wanted to say that I'm finding that more and more emotions and pre-votes are happening here at the committee table. And I'm now at the level of real uncomfortableness with that. We're talking about trying to mediate the risk of motions failing or recommendations failing. And I think those are the decisions that we should be making at the council table at the evening meeting. So I'm really torn on this, because now I'm being asked to put up my hand in a situation where I really don't want to have to make a pre-vote. So I just want to make those comments.
This is public. Okay. Okay, thank you. I mean, I'm happy with the recommendation. I think some good. Happy receiving it. I've just a couple of concerns. I think that some things can be dealt with as we sort of actually start to lay policy. Mine was about the fact that we could knock down a small house and build a big house, and that those builders, who in some cases are building, two family homes where there was one, aren't making the same contributions to the community as others. And I think that maybe there's an opportunity to address that in a future report in conjunction with other things. So given that, I'm happy with it. And so I think Mayor Stewart is going to speak. And
my apologies for speaking a third time. I just wanted to address the question of whether this is a pre-vote. There are some members of council were there in a different era when we had committee that wasn't committee of the whole. This is committee, and for a lot of councils, it's a committee of 3 or 4 members of council that sit on land use, and land use will hash this out and work it all out, and they'll come up with a version of something that gets decided at committee and gets put forward to council for approval. And whether committee is 3 or committee is of the whole, that's how it works. And we, as a council, opted for committee of the whole, generally speaking, because everyone wanted to attend committee. They wanted to be at Parks and Rec because there was all kinds of stuff they were deciding, and then we were going to be over at engineering because there's all kinds of things we're deciding there. And they didn't want to be, they felt there wasn't enough information in front of them if they only went to the committee that they were on, the committee of 3, and then showed up at council, and there were other decisions that were putting up council that they weren't party to. So this is a much more transparent and open process. Everything gets decided in open, and none of these decisions are binding on anybody. They're simply, these are the questions that we're going to ask council to resolve. Whether this was a committee of 3 or a committee of 9, that's what committee does. It sends stuff to council to resolve, and I want to make sure we could go back to committee and have a committee of 3, but I suspect the complaint might then be that this isn't a very open process. So this is a much more open process.
Thank you. Okay. Been moved to receive the report and seconded. All in favor of receiving the report? Okay. Any opposed to receiving the report? I have Councillor Rasmussen, Councillor O'Neill opposed to receiving the report.
Okay. Let's move on to the Bloom and next thing.
Item 5 is the 2016 Communities in Bloom National Entry. We have introductory remarks from the General Manager, Parks, Recreation and Culture Services, and the report is before you for information.
Okay, thank you. We have Consultation.
Move the report. I love it. I love it.
Wow. We have the, okay, it's moved by Councillor Reid and seconded by Councillor Rasmussen, and we'll have our update. Mr. Aguilera.
I won't be too long. It's a busy year for us, but it continues to be an interesting year, and we're continuing to try and bring a lot of great things through programs like Communities in Bloom. Just to build on last year's success, this report really just outlines one of our priorities, which was to put in a national entry, and to do so with generally the same format we did last year. We were very successful, and we've got a number of new initiatives we're building on, which really build on some of the comments we received from the committee last year. Wanted to note just on the budget, we're following a similar process as we did last year in terms of requesting some funding through the community capital from the Spirit Grant, assuming that is acceptable for council's for council. It isn't a standing thing we do, so it isn't part of our operating budget. We may not do this every year. We just started doing it again last year, and that's why you see it in this fashion. If it is something that is more regular, it would be a different, obviously a different approach. But we are getting lots of value as well from the in-kind work, and I think it's something that we were very, very proud of last year, and we're hoping to do very, very well nationally this year as well. We're happy to take council's comments on the initiatives.
Thank you. I have Councillor Towner and then Councillor Reid.
Thank you. I think everybody knows how much I love this initiative. I want to just take this opportunity to say congratulations to everybody again on the 5 Bloom Award last year, and just what a success last year's was. The increase in volunteerism, the civic pride, it was just great all around. And as I started to read this, I was secretly or not so secretly hoping I'd see something about another community garden. I got to have my first acting mayor gig as opening the Scott Creek Community Garden, which was just momentous for me because I'm passionate about those. And so I just want to say that I love the idea of the Coquitlam Munch. There was the next paragraph I read as I thought that. It engages the businesses, the residents, and I'm really excited about that, and I look forward to hopefully that taking off and spreading to other parts of the city after this. I also just want to tell you about the rose. I think that's really, really well done. But did you all realize that it's the color of salmon? In the little write-up, it doesn't say that. It says it's hardy and all that, but it's salmon colored. And given that our name is after redfish up the river and all the salmon theme, it's the color of salmon. Like after you're eating it. So, was that on purpose?
Through the chair, yeah. We had a choice of 3 or 4 different roses, and that was both the most startling in terms of color, but the only salmon choice.
Okay, well, it's beautiful. Another question I have is the little toy libraries. I love that idea. The little libraries are popping up, and they're very popular, and people love them. But I'm wondering, I attended a forum maybe 6 or 8 weeks ago at Winslow Center, put on by Fraser Health, and who put it on? It was healthy, active living and whatnot. And the concept there was these playground boxes. And I spoke to somebody in Parks and Rec a couple weeks ago, because I think they're boxes and they're covered in the nice wrap and there's a lock and they have toys in them. and I'm hearing that 3 are coming, but I'm wondering, is this in addition to those boxes, or is this in conjunction with them? Are they going to be different parks?
Last year, sorry, to the chair, we put about half a dozen in parks last year. So chess, yes, they weren't. We were afraid of having anything that we'd have to both lock up and then provide access to. We didn't want to add that level of bureaucracy, so they were just Tupperware chests full of toys, and they were very successful at the park. Our only regret was that they were relatively low profile. You couldn't, they were on the ground. So the idea is to, but also I don't think there's any need for the locks. I would be afraid of what might get locked in a park, but more than that, that process of having to hand it out and control it seems unnecessary. When we had actually really good, people were not stealing toys. They were coming and adding them. Maybe they were playing with them and bringing something different the next day. So we want to continue that theme and just make it a little higher profile by creating baskets with then a high umbrella over them to draw attention to them.
Okay. And is there any strategy in place? Like, for example, are we going to put them first in more of the parks in the more economically challenged neighborhoods, or?
We have a list, sorry, again to the chair, that of places where it seems like self-evident that that's somewhere we want to encourage some play, and I think Cottonwood Park, and there's a handful of parks that we want to do for sure this year, and from there we'll be looking for other ideas. But I think anywhere where people have already decided that a little library is appropriate, usually they're somewhere where there's a gathering place and a bench and a playground, so the thing go together really well, I think.
No, I agree. So I love it. I could say much more, but I just wanted to ask those. So thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Reid.
Thank you. I love this. You've done such a great job. The Coquitlam Munch. How cool is that? Because this is the first year for the Munch, right? Mm-hmm. It might be an idea to have some application forms with different businesses if people want to get involved next year, because this will grow. So instead of just word of mouth, which someone will go home and forget about, have little application forms, with a little lettuce on top or something. Get some cartoons from Metro. They've got all kinds of them. The Coquitlam Rose, I talked to Bev quite a bit about this, and on July 3rd, would it be possible to ask the Rose Society to have a group of their members there to give little clippings away or whatever, or buy them or whatever, but actually give advice, rose advice? They do that, sort of. And the last one, again, is the Flower of the Year. I love this idea. This is just so cool. So basing on what I just said about the rose, I don't know if you're aware, but some of these people in the rose, they're so avid about what you do with roses and weeds and bugs and all that stuff. And I think this might be a real opportunity for us to ask the boards of Glen Pine and Dogwood if they would like to form a blooming committee that would sort of be people that could give advice on flowers and blooms, and specifically start with our two. And then maybe on July 1st, it could be the Blooming Committee. And there's lots of people there that want to give advice on stuff like that. And it would be a good way to sort of tie Glen Pine. Yeah.
Through the chair, we've been really happy with the cooperation with the number of volunteers that we're drawing through the Inspiration Garden to this kind of, and you're right, we have lots of people who have lots of knowledge that they want to share with the community. So that's one of that's embedded in this all the way along. But it's a great suggestion.
But advertise who they are so people can be in touch. Thank you.
That's great. Okay, and I have Councillor Wilson next.
Congratulations and good luck. Have the Little Toy Libraries, have you been in contact with the subgroup for 125 who's doing the neighborhood nights about that? Perfect.
Yes.
Yeah. Awesome. I love everything about it. Good luck.
Yeah. Excellent. Okay, any further comment? Okay, for an action, recommendation the committee receive the report. I think it's been moved and seconded. All in favor of receiving? Okay, any opposed? Thank you, Rich. Unanimous.
Thank you.
I could get one
130 a car.
Moving on to other business. The first other business item concerns water bylaws and was raised by Councillor O'Neill.
Oh. Yes, thank you very much. I raised this issue to, I guess at the least, warn the public about what I think is an inequity in our, I think is an inequity in the bylaw, or at least get some information on it, and at best maybe foster consideration of a change in the water shortage response bylaw. This is very timely. Three things happening that line up to make this a timely issue. One, Council has recently given consideration to and passed water shortage response bylaw amendments. Second is, just yesterday, the city was selling discount rain barrels, $55 a rain barrel. I guess actually there's probably four things. The third thing is that we have suddenly hit summer-like weather, and so we're starting to think about the water usage, and we know that as part of the water shortage response bylaw, the watering restrictions are kicking in a couple of weeks early, May 15th. So with all of this in mind, I hear from my neighbor over the weekend, or I think it might have been Friday, that he had recently appeared before our bylaw appeals court that happens in council chambers, and hoping to get the ticket that he was given last September overturned. He was given a ticket for operating a water feature, water fountain in his front yard, and he has quite a magnificent array of thing there, a bit of a waterfall. It's not a fountain, it's more of a waterfall. And during stage 2 and stage 3, I guess it was stage 3 when this happened, and the bylaw states quite clearly you are not allowed to operate fountains and water features, according to what I was told, during especially stage 3 restrictions. And he said that he thought that this was really quite unfair because, one, his water feature uses recycled water, and two, it's fed from a rain barrel. That he's collected that water, and actually there was bits of rainfall on several of the days in the preceding 2 weeks from when he was ticketed. So he says this was all natural rainfall water that I had collected. He's saying this, I'm quoting him, that I was using to run my water feature, and I got ticketed for it. I don't think that's fair. Sounds on the surface like he's got a great idea. I haven't dug down and investigate, but I thought it's very timely right now to get this out in the open, given all the different things I just described, good weather, the looming, anything. So, what sayest thou at the table here?
In a second.
Through the chair, the same way.
To Councillor O'Neill, first I really would like to thank you for telling all the main points why water conservation is important in the city and what steps we can take should it come to that point. As to what happened in this particular instance, before I get there, I want to make sure that we all understand that the Metro Vancouver administered water shortage response plan bylaw that deals only with drinking water supplied by Metro Vancouver, and specifically recycled water or well water or anything else is exempted from that bylaw. And in accordance, our enforcement, when it's necessary, deals only with Metro Vancouver supplied drinking water related violations. In this particular instance, when our officer was on site, there was no evidence, no mention, nothing that the homeowner was using collected recycled water. And further, when it came to the adjudication process, that's when the first time we learned about that it might have been recycled water, but even at that hearing there was no evidence provided whatsoever that indeed it was recycled collected water, and as such that's how we ended up with the decision as we know it.
Oh, that's good to know then. Now that point of clarification that the bylaw does not apply to recycled water or rain barrel collected water is good to know. So I don't know why he didn't present any evidence. He said he attempted to. And it was just, he said the bylaw was clear, that he was running the feature, so he was ticketed. So great new information on that. That's all I need to know. Thank you very much.
Okay, Mayor Stewart.
And that was a question that had come up at Metro Vancouver as well, because the bylaw, the response plan at Metro isn't as clear as that. Or rather, it's clearer than that. It simply says fountains shut off. With sprinkling, it says sprinkling of water with treated water is prohibited. So obviously you can treat with rainwater or gray water or whatever. You could sprinkle with that. You could probably power wash with gray water, but with fountains it says specifically fountains shut off.
Correct.
Oh, not fountains running on treated water shut off.
So, wow, there's the difference.
There is a preamble of at the beginning of the bylaw that these restrictions are intended to regulate Metro Vancouver supplied drinking water. You have it here, actually.
So it's not consistent with itself because it's...
So it's clear from this point on, from what I'm hearing then, that if somebody can then in Coquitlam, or perhaps even Metro, if they interpret the same way, can run a fountain or a waterfall or a water feature if they are using, and if they can show they are using, recycled water out of the rain barrel or some other collection system. It's not coming from Metro Vancouver's water supply, drinking water that's been treated and to the highest nth degree, with great expense, of course.
That is correct. And when we go out to enforce the bylaw, when we become aware of the fact that whatever that feature is run from recycled or collected water, we will not issue a ticket.
Great, good to know. Thank you very much.
There you go. Thank you. Oh, Councillor Wilson.
Just a minor point, though. Doesn't that make it difficult on the bylaw officers? And maybe that's why Metro is so cut and dry. But our bylaw officer goes out, they see a fountain, they don't know it's using recycled water. They knock on the door, the person's not home. What are they supposed to do? They'd probably write a ticket, right?
How would they know?
That's why I'm wondering if that's why Metro is the way it is.
Through the chair, that is correct. When the bylaw officers are out in the neighborhoods and they see these fountains running, they don't necessarily know. And if they don't have the opportunity for that direct conversation at that time with the neighbor, then they err on the side of caution, and they will issue that warning or ticket as the bylaw dictates. At any point after that, a resident has the opportunity to contact the city, speak directly with us and provide that information, and we have a number of circumstances where residents have done that, and at any point through the phase right up to adjudication, which a resident also always has that opportunity for adjudication if they receive a ticket, the evidence comes in and we look at it at any point, and then the ultimate stop being at the adjudication table, another opportunity for the resident to bring forward that information, and we have examples where they have been able to provide that evidence and the ticket has been canceled as a result.
So if I get a ticket for this example, if I can provide proof before any adjudication process that it's using recycled water, I don't have to go to adjudication.
Well, I wouldn't say quite that directly. If the staff will take that information in, we always review the evidence package before it actually goes to adjudication. So if on review of that evidence and there's more information that's come in, staff are able to make that evaluation, then we'll do that. If it's still vague or we're uncertain, we will allow the adjudicator to make that final decision. So I guess my point is where we're able to, we will always apply reason and judgment. Where we're unclear or uncertain, that's what the adjudication process is for.
Okay. And so it sounds like we are being more flexible than Metro.
No, actually, can I correct what I said earlier? Because there is that clause that Joseph mentioned. The water shortage response plan applies only to the use of treated drinking water. This is way up at the top of the thing, the preamble. Yeah. The restrictions do not apply to the use of rainwater, grey water, any forms of recycled water or other sources of water outside the GVWD municipal water supply system. So presumably if you dig down deep enough and you've got a well to supply your fountain, there probably should be some mechanism for signage or a little notice or something that you put next to your fountain to say this, because otherwise the neighbors are going to complain.
Yeah.
You doubted Joseph?
It's just
Like the nematode treatment.
No, as soon as Joseph said it, I started looking for it because I knew it was here.
Okay. Good. Great. I think that was everything on that.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the explanation.
Mr. Chair, that's the last item on the agenda.
Second, motion to adjourn by Councillor Marsden, second by Councillor Tanner. All in favor? Great. We'll take a 5-minute break and reconvene our special closed meeting.